Hey folks, today I'm going to answer the question, is my L8T consuming engine oil? And no, this is not an episode of Mythbusters, although when I was preparing for this video, it reminded me of that. But this is my 2024 GMC Sierra 2500 HD. It is the gasser, so it's the 6.6 liter V8 paired to the 10-speed Allison transmission. And so the question I want to answer today, is my engine consuming oil? Now, I've owned this truck for about 9 months, and I remember before purchasing it, going through the research, weighing different options, different trucks, I remember stumbling across an online forum where users were complaining specifically about engine oil consumption on the L8T. Of course, that's the code name for the 6.6 liter. And so I remember going through those comments, and it appeared to me at the time that real users were having this real problem of engine oil consumption, but it seemed like, in my assessment, it was fairly isolated. It wasn't widespread, perhaps. So that definitely weighed into my purchasing decision ultimately, but I did buy the truck. And after I published a build video on it about 9 months ago or so, of course, people chimed in the comments, said, hey, watch out. That engine you got there, it's going to consume oil. Make sure you're checking your oil. And of course, there's been a steady flow of those comments throughout a lot of the videos that I've done on this particular truck. But I've always been curious, is the engine oil consumption a real issue on the L8T for the average user, or is it just blown out of proportion, as sometimes things are? Well, GM actually released a service bulletin last summer, August 2023. You can pause it there if you wish to read there. I'll also put a link down below. But basically, the title is higher than expected oil consumption at 8,600 gross vehicle weight and above. Then it has a bunch of different models there. And of course, the Silverado and Sierra HD trucks with the L8T are listed. It's also interesting, though, there's a lot of other heavy-duty vehicles that are listed all the way dating back to 2003 with the Hummer H2 there. So that's kind of interesting. But it goes through and explains that you may lose, and this is really what I think triggered all the hype on it, you may lose up to 1 quart per 1,000 miles or 100 gallons of fuel used. Really, they talk about how fuel is a better indicator compared to just mileage alone, because the fuel indicates how hard your engine is working. So it goes through and it gives some advisements about checking your engine oil level, making sure you wait 15 minutes after the engine's been shut off to get an accurate reading, how to put the dipstick in there. It talks about how towing or heavy usage or high RPMs may increase the engine oil consumption. But at the end of the day, the thing that stands out the most to me, and I'm sure many others, is the fact that the bulletin specifically mentions that it is acceptable to lose up to 1 quart of oil per 1,000 miles or 100 gallons of fuel used. And actually, this is 1 quart of oil all the way to the top. That seems like a lot of oil to lose just over 1,000 miles or 100 gallons of fuel. You figure that's about 3 fill-ups at the gas station. And guys, just something to point out on this bulletin here dated August 2023 is it does list the L8T here, but if you look at the model years, it's only showing 2020 to 2022, excluding the 23s and 24s. Now, it's my understanding 24 is when the Allison transmission was introduced there. I don't think any major changes that were made to the engine itself. So it's kind of interesting that 23 and 24 is not listed here. It could just be that it's out of date and they need to update it. But I just want to point that out. Technically, my truck by model year is not part of this bulletin. Now, I do wonder if this service bulletin alone and the circulation of it at least was a factor that played into all the hype and chatter on this particular issue, because in a way it does normalize engine oil consumption. It talks about 1 quart per 1,000 miles. So I'm about to do an oil change here, and my interval is just over 5,000 miles. So that means if I were to have to top it off at each 1,000 miles, a full quart, that would be up to 5 quarts of oil, 5 of these, that I've added over the course of the oil change. And the bulletin essentially says that's acceptable, which does seem excessive in that case. I'm no expert, I'm not a mechanic. It's my understanding that every engine consumes some oil between oil changes. But I would say for me personally, if I have an engine and I'm filling it up at the oil change, and then I'm checking the dipstick level periodically, and I'm having to consistently refill it based on that dipstick reading, then to me that would be very inconvenient and tell me maybe something is wrong with the engine itself. And so I think that's where all the hype and chatter comes into play on this bulletin, because it's almost normalized in a way. So it's been a frequent question in a lot of my videos, and that is your L8T consuming engine oil? I did a video on MPGs a few weeks back, and I said that was probably the most common question I get on the truck, and someone joked, well, is the second most common question, is your engine consuming oil? And perhaps maybe it is. And I've always been curious too, is my engine consuming oil? I kept a sharp eye on it. I checked the dipstick, like I said, and I'll show you here in just a minute what it looks like before I do the change. But I thought, why not just measure the oil that I extract, that I drain out of the engine, and just see how much oil is left over the last 5,000 plus miles. And that way I can answer the question, at least for me, is my engine consuming oil? So first, let me show you what the actual dipstick is reading before I do the oil change. My engine is heated up and I've let it sit for over 15 minutes. So I'm just gonna wipe the dipstick clean first and then put it back in. I'll make sure that it is seated all the way down there and pull it out and see if I can show you what it is actually reading here. So let me put the paper towel behind it and see if you can see that on the video. I'll take a picture of it as well in case this doesn't turn out. But you can see it is just a little bit below the halfway point. And that's typically what I've gotten most of the times when I've checked it. Like I said, I'll check it a couple times a month as I do different fill-ups at the gas station. And it's always been right about halfway in the shaded portion, sometimes just a little bit below. And here's another one just to show you a second one. So if it's in the shaded area, then I should be good to go. I shouldn't have to add any oil, but I still am curious, has it consumed any oil over the last 5,000 plus miles? And guys, just to be clear, if I didn't say it already, I have not had to add oil to my engine yet because every time I've checked, it's always been in the shaded portion of the dipstick. But next I'm going to drain the oil just like I always do in this drain pan right here. I'll pull the drain plug first, and then I'll be real careful to collect any oil that's in the oil filter and let it all drain into this pan right here. I will take a small sample for Blackstone Laboratories in a separate little sample container, but I'll factor that in. It's about 2.7 ounces. Then once I get all the oil collected into this drain pan, I'll use this measuring cup right here to measure out how much oil I actually collected. And I'm really curious to see, I put 8 quarts in about 5,000 miles ago, and so I'm curious to see how much am I actually going to drain out. Okay, so the oil drain was successful. I think I got every last drop here. I'm just gonna let the remaining oil that's in the filter here drain out, and then I'm going to start measuring it 1 quart at a time. And I'm really curious, guys. I've never done this before on any vehicle. I've never measured the amount of oil that I've taken out, and so I'm really curious to see what the final number will be. So basically, I'm just going to use this measuring cup here, do 1 quart at a time, and we'll see. Again, I put 8 quarts in to start with. All right, so that's the first quart. You can kind of see where I'm at there. All right, so that is 6 quarts. And so we are going on to number 7 here. All right, so up to 8 quarts. And I can already tell you that I don't have enough in here to fill up this last one. And you know, I wasn't perfectly accurate. I mean, I could have slopped some oil when I was draining. Of course, there's some oil stuck to the pan inside of here. There could be a little bit of oil in the oil filter still, you know, that I didn't let it drain long enough. But this is really interesting. So basically, this is the 8th quart. And I'm gonna let it drain here just a little bit longer, and then I'll tell you how many ounces are in this last quart. All right, so we're looking at about 8 ounces in this last quart, plus the oil sample that I took earlier for Blackstone that I'm gonna send off. And so that puts us at 10, let's just say 11 ounces to round up there. And so that means we are shy of that full 8 quarts. There's 32 ounces in a quart. And so that means we have 21 ounces of oil that were supposedly consumed. Okay, so let me summarize the experiment. I just finished draining all of the old oil, measuring it out. This is what's left of the 8th quart there. By the time I factor in the sample that I took, plus what's in here, I've got about 11 ounces of oil approximately in that 8th quart out of 32. That's what it should have been, or at least what I put in at the last oil change. Now, I probably could have been more precise in the experiment. There could be some oil in the pan. Like I said, it's a little bit of oil in the filter still. There could even be some oil in the engine in the pan that I didn't wait long enough for every little last drop to drain out, right? So how much is all that residual oil in total? Well, I don't think it's gonna account for all of this right here. I mean, really, that's about 20 ounces approximately of oil that's missing. I would be surprised if all that combined would be more than 5 ounces, right? So just for the sake margin of error, I'm just gonna say 5 ounce margin of error. I just made that up, but it sounds about right. So 15 to 20 ounces of oil is missing essentially from that 8th quart. Now, being completely candid, that number surprised me a little bit at least. I mean, with the margin of error factored in, 15 to 20 ounces of oil missing. I don't think it was the number so much surprised me, but just visually looking at it, I don't think I was expecting that much oil to be missing out of that 8th quart. Now, I'm a newbie, guys, a rookie. I've never measured out how much oil I've drained from any vehicle, and so I just don't know what's normal. I think somebody who does this for a living and measures out, you know, different engines over time would be able to look at this and say, yeah, that's completely within spec. But at the same time, I never added any oil to the engine over the last interval because every time I check the dipstick, it's always been in the shaded section. And I'll throw a picture up again of what it looked like just before the oil change. You can see it is in the shaded section. It is under the halfway point slightly, but it is in the shaded section there. Again, the last interval was about 5,500 miles in total, a little over 6 months. Out of that 5,500 miles, about 1,500 miles towing, and the rest was unladen there. And so if you do the math there based on the oil that's missing here, it equates to about 3.6 ounces per 1,000 miles. Remember, in the service bulletin, it talked about how up to 1 quart, or 32 ounces, was acceptable. So in my case, it was about 3.6 ounces per 1,000 miles. And again, guys, I don't know how that compares against other vehicles, other engines, because I've never done that before. But I think what it does tell me is, first of all, I'm well within the GM service bulletin at only 3.6 ounces of oil per 1,000 miles in my case. But secondly, concerning the dipstick in that shaded portion, if it gets to the lower section of that shaded portion, it probably means I'm missing about a full quart of oil based on what I pulled out of here and based on what the dipstick was reading at present. So that just gives me a helpful reference moving forward. If I get to the lower section of the dipstick in the future, I know that that's probably about a quart approximately that is missing from the engine. Now, for those curious on what oil I'm using, this go around I'm gonna put in the Pennzoil Platinum Full Synthetic. This has kind of been my go-to oil for the last decade or so on other vehicles. And you know, there's a lot of good oils out there, but I really like this one a lot. However, this was not available on the last oil change interval that I did. It wasn't available in the Dexos 1 Gen 3 spec at least. And so last oil change, I actually used the Mobil 1 Full Synthetic SUV and Truck oil blend. And so that's what I drained out of here. So another question that comes to my mind, are there certain brands of oil that may burn more than others, right? And so this go round, we saw what the Mobil 1 did. Next, I'll try the Pennzoil and just see, is there a difference between oil consumption based on the brand of oil, right? Well, let me close out the video by going back to the opening question, and that is, does the L8T in my truck consume oil? And the answer is yes, about 3.6 ounces per 1,000 miles, or about 12% of GM's allotted 1 quart per 1,000 miles. So does that concern me? Well, visually, like I said, it did surprise me to see how much that looks over the course of an oil change. Again, 5,500 miles this go round, but I was always within the shaded portion of the dipstick, well within the shaded portion of the dipstick. So in the end, I don't think it's a concern. I think that probably every engine consumes a certain amount of oil, and how much is healthy, right? That's a hard question to answer, but I keep going back to the fact that I was well within the shaded portion of the dipstick. Well, guys, if you have any questions, definitely drop them below. And as always, thanks for watching.